Private Party. Chapter 1. Invitation to the Masquerade. Murphy sat in his dreary, dimly lit bar, lost in his thoughts and sorrow after a painful breakup with his girlfriend. For the past few weeks, his life had felt empty and aimless. He mechanically swirled a glass of whiskey in his hands, watching the ice slowly melt into the amber liquid. Suddenly, someone touched his shoulder. Murphy looked up and saw his old acquaintance, Lena, a dancer from a local club. She was always the life of the party, bright and cheerful. "Hi, Murphy," she said, sitting down next to him. "Long time no see. How are you?" "The same as usual," he replied without much enthusiasm, trying to smile, but only sadness showed on his face. Lena looked at him sympathetically and, after a moment of thought, suggested, I think you need to get out a bit. There's a private party tonight, a masquerade. Everyone will be in masks, a fancy place, lots of interesting people. Come with me, it'll be fun." Murphy was hesitant at first. He didn't want to leave the house and face a world that seemed hostile and empty. But in the end, he agreed. He really needed to distract himself from his thoughts, and maybe Lena was right. The masquerade might be just the escape he needed. Chapter 2. The Hall of Masks. When Murphy and Lena arrived at the old building, which resembled an abandoned hotel, he was surprised. After passing through a small entrance with security, they put on their masks, and Lena nudged him towards the massive oak doors. Inside revealed a luxurious interior. High ceilings with richly decorated chandeliers, walls covered with contemporary art installations, and soft, subdued lighting creating an atmosphere of mystery and elegance. There were many guests, but Murphy felt out of place. Lena reassured him by taking his hand and leading him to the bar. She ordered 2 glasses of champagne and handed one to him. "Relax," she said with a wink. "Enjoy the evening. You deserve it." Murphy took a sip of champagne, looking around. The guests were of different ages, from frail old people to young men and women in chic, sexy dresses. Everyone wore masks that concealed their faces, adding even more mystery and eeriness to the party. The music played loudly, creating a festive atmosphere. Murphy began to feel a bit more comfortable, enjoying the champagne and the setting. He even started talking to some guests, although most of them seemed strange and reserved to him. Chapter 3. The Beginning of Horror. Suddenly, a light shone on the railing of the second floor. A masked DJ stood there, and Murphy recognized him as a world-famous musician. His music topped all the charts worldwide. Murphy was in shock, not understanding how he could have ended up at such an elite event. But soon one of the guests, obviously an influential person, stepped into the center of the hall. Silence immediately fell around him. All eyes were on him. "Dear brothers and sisters," he began, "the long-awaited evening has come. The evening we eagerly await every year. The evening that gives us life, beauty, youth, prosperity, influence, power. The evening that gives us happiness. The evening in which we do not forget to express our gratitude to our patron." Murphy felt a strange unease. The man's words sounded threatening. He looked around for Lena, but she was nowhere to be seen. She had disappeared into the crowd, and he couldn't understand where she had gone. Chapter 4. The Sacrifice. A man in a red cloak with a hood stepped into the middle of the hall. When the cloak was removed from him, Murphy recognized Lena. She stood naked in the center, her gaze empty. Murphy didn't understand what was happening. "Let the gratitude begin," the man announced. The crowd moved towards Lena, reaching out their hands. Murphy froze in horror. Soon Lena began to scream, and her screams turned into disgusting moans and slurping sounds. Someone in the crowd raised a hand, holding a bloody piece of flesh. Murphy felt his blood run cold. He couldn't believe his eyes. These people were not just strange, they were monsters. He wanted to scream, but the words stuck in his throat. Chapter 5. Escape. In shock, Murphy backed away. The crowd stopped and turned to him. Everyone looked at him with bloody mouths and hands. "There is an outsider among us," one of them calmly said. Murphy ran. He ran out of the building, caught a taxi, and went far away. No one chased him, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. His heart pounded as if it was ready to burst from his chest. He couldn't stop trembling. Chapter 6: Desperation. The next morning, after a sleepless night, Murphy decided to go to the police. He knew his story sounded insane, but he hoped that justice would prevail. At the police station, he told everything that had happened at the party. The officers were skeptical, but his state and the details of his story made them go to the scene of the alleged crime. When they arrived at the place, they were met with empty halls. No signs of a party, not a single guest, not a drop of blood. Everything looked as if nothing had happened. Murphy was in shock and despair. The feeling of unreality grew stronger with every minute. The officers began to search the building but found no evidence. Murphy became the object of ridicule. One of the detectives even threatened to arrest him for a false report. A year passed. Murphy tried to live a normal life, but every night he remembered the horrors of that party. He withdrew more and more into himself, feeling that he was being watched. Chapter 7: The Stalker. One evening, returning home, Murphy noticed that he was being followed. He quickened his pace, but the shadow behind him didn't fall behind. His heart beat faster, and he felt cold sweat on his skin. Reaching his apartment, he locked the door and looked out the window. A man in a black suit stood outside, looking straight at him. His gaze was as frightening as everything Murphy had seen at that party. That gaze expressed nothing. No anger, no joy, just terrifying emptiness. The next day, Murphy decided he needed to disappear. He packed his things and headed to the station, planning to go as far away as possible. But everywhere he went, he felt the prying eyes. Chapter 8: Trapped. On the train that was supposed to take Murphy far away from all the nightmare, he began to notice that every passenger seemed to cast suspicious glances at him. He tried to convince himself it was just paranoia caused by his recent experiences. But every time he looked up, he saw that same man in the black suit. The stranger was always nearby, like a shadow, watching his every move. Murphy couldn't calm down. He felt his heart pounding in his chest. Every sound of the train, every accidental movement of the passengers seemed like a threat to him. He sat clutching the armrests, not taking his eyes off the door of the carriage, expecting at any moment that this man would burst in. When the train stopped in a small provincial town, Murphy got off and headed to the nearest hotel. He hoped that here, away from big cities and crowds, he would be able to hide. But even in the hotel room, he couldn't feel safe. At night, it seemed to him that he heard footsteps behind the door. He even got up and checked the lock several times to calm down. Chapter 9: The Pursuer. In the morning, Murphy went outside and saw him. That same man in the black suit. He stood across from the hotel, looking straight at him. Murphy rushed back into the building, his heart pounding so hard he could barely breathe. It was clear to him that he was being followed. All day he tried to hide, moving from one place to another. He went into a small shop, trying to confuse the trail, but every time he went outside, he saw that man. He was always there, as if he knew Murphy's every step in advance. Murphy reached a point where he began to doubt his sanity. Maybe it was all a figment of his imagination. Maybe his mind, tormented by horrors, was just playing a cruel joke on him. Chapter 10: Night of Nightmares. In the evening, Murphy was back at the hotel. He locked all the doors and windows, trying to make sure no one could get inside. He lay in bed trying to sleep, but every rustle, every sound made him jump. At night, he woke up from a strange sound. Someone was in his room. Murphy jumped up and saw the man in the black suit in front of him. He stood still, looking at him, and behind him stood two more men in black suits. "Who are you?" Murphy asked, his voice trembling with fear. "What do you want?" The man did not answer. Instead, he took a step forward, and Murphy felt his heart stop. He realized he was caught when it was too late to do anything. His mouth was taped, and his hands and feet were tied. Chapter 11: In Captivity. He was taken to an unknown place. The blindfold over his eyes didn't allow him to see where they were taking him, but the sensations told him it was a long and torturous journey. When the blindfold was removed, Murphy saw people in masks surrounding him in a dark hall with only a bright light shining above him. Murphy was filled with terror. The same crowd had gathered again, but in the red cloak in the center of the hall stood himself. The masked faces looked at him with cold indifference. Chapter 12, The Ritual. "Let the gratitude begin," announced the same main man in the mask. Murphy screamed, but no one paid attention. The ritual began, and all he could hear were his own screams and sounds that were impossible to describe. They were sounds of pain, horror, and inevitability. His body burned from the touches, and he felt blood trickling down his skin. The crowd around him began to whisper some words, incomprehensible and sinister. These sounds consumed his consciousness, making him lose touch with reality. He saw faces distorted by masks, eagerly looking at him like a victim meant for their horrific ritual. Chapter 13, The End. This story remained unsolved. Murphy became another victim of the secret society that continued to exist in the shadows, carrying out its terrible rituals. In every city, in every little corner of the earth, there could be such a society, hidden under the mask of ordinary life, ready for a new ritual, a new victim. The end. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to our channel and don't forget to hit the like button. Thank you for your attention.